Math 7, Lesson 12.6, Compound Events. A compound event is an event that consists of two or more events. That are considered as a single event. So it's when two or more things happen and it's all considered one event. An independent event is the probability of one event does not affect the probability or likelihood that the other event will occur. So an example of that is when you're flipping a coin. And the probability when you're flipping a coin of getting heads or and then tails, the fact that you flipped the coin and you got heads first and then you got tails, the second event, the tails, didn't depend on getting a heads the first time. They're completely separate events. They don't rely on each other. And so that's called independent events. And the way that we would figure out the probability of independent events is that we would multiply each event by itself. So that would look like this. If the probability of getting heads is 1 out of 2, and then rolling tails, well, that probability is also 1 out of 2. So the probability of it being heads and then tails is 1/4. Now let's take a look at dependent events. So the probability of one event does affect the probability of the other, or likelihood that the other event will occur. So that would be if, for example, we had letter cards and each of our letter cards had a different letter on it. And so one card had green, one had, a G, one had an R, one had an E, one had an E, and one had an N. And so you're finding out what is the probability of drawing a consonant, then a vowel, without replacing it. So that means first drawing a consonant, keeping it out, and then on your next turn you draw a vowel. And what's the probability of that happen? So one event, the probability of drawing a consonant, that will happen. And then when you draw a vowel, the fact that you drew a consonant first, it will depend on your odds of getting a vowel. So what that would mean is this. If we had our probability of drawing a consonant, let's see how many consonants there are. There are G, R, and N. So there are 3 out of 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 3 out of 5. And we multiply that by the probability of drawing a vowel. Well, there are 2 vowels, but because we already took out one consonant, we only have 4 cards in there now. So now it's only drawing 2 out of 4. So that's what it means by it's dependent, because the first event does impact the second event. So that probability would be 6 out of 20. And then we would reduce that down to 3 out of 10 is our probability. So that's the difference between independent events, one does not affect the other, and dependent, where one does affect the other. Let's take a look at some problems. Explain why the events are either dependent or independent. So the first one is if we roll an even number on both the first and the second roll of a dice. So is one of those dependent on another? Is the fact that I rolled one even number on my second roll, is that going to matter that I rolled an even on the first? It doesn't, because so that means it's independent. They don't rely on each other. Because the fact that I rolled an even number on the second, doesn't matter what I rolled on the first. So number 2 is choosing a red rose and not replacing it, and then choosing a white rose from a vase of 3 white, 2 red, and 6 yellow roses. Is that an independent event or a dependent? That one would actually be dependent. Let's change that up a little bit. Dependent. because when I draw my first rows, my second rows, I'm going to have less in there than I did when I chose my first one because I already took one out. So it's going to be dependent. Now let's do some problems with that. A box contains 2 red blocks, 1 yellow block, and 1 green block. A block is chosen at random and not replaced, and then another block is chosen. So number 3 is, what is the probability of drawing a red and then a yellow? So let's take each of these events. So the probability of drawing a red is going to be, let's see, there are 2 blocks and there are 4 total. So it's going to be 2 out of 4. And then the probability of drawing a yellow, how many yellows are in there? There's 1 yellow, but now there are only 3 blocks. So now we multiply those 2 events. So it's 2 over 4 times 1 over 3. That reduces to 1/2. So that's going to be 1/6 is the probability of drawing a red and then drawing a yellow. Number 4, probability of a red is again 2 out of 4. And then the probability of another red, let's call this red 1 and red 2, is going to be, well, now there's only 1 red in there because you already took 1 out, and there's only 3 blocks in there because you took 1 out. And then you multiply those 2 events. 2/4 times 1/3, and that is again 1/6. That's the probability. Number 5, probability of a green. There's 1 green out of 4. And then the second time, drawing another green. Well, there was only 1 green and you took it out. So there's no chance of drawing another green. So your probability of those 2 events is 1/4 times 0, which is 0. That cannot happen. Okay, let's take a look at some more. A box contains 2 striped blocks and 1 checkered block. A block is chosen at random and replaced. Then another block is chosen. So it makes a difference if whatever is being chosen or taken out is replaced or not. So number 6, we have the probability of a striped is going to be 2 out of 3. And because you're putting it back, then you still have that same probability of getting another striped. So that one is going to be 2/3, and you always multiply your events times 2/3, which is 4/9. Oops. 4/9. Okay, number 7, the probability of a striped is 2/3. And then the probability of a checkered is 1 out of 3. And then you multiply your 2 events. 2/3 times 1/3 is going to be 2/9. And then 8 is a probability of 1 of each. So this one is the probability of your first pull is going to be, you can either get an S or a C. So that is 2 out of 3, an S or a C. So you can pull one of those 2 out of the 3. And then the probability of the second one is going to be the same. Let's just say a C or an S. So there are 2 different choices you can pull and 3 options. So it would be, you multiply your events, 2/3 times 2/3. So that is going to be 4/9.